Chair recognizes Ms. Luna.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Honorable Robbins, based on your record before your committee, when did Governor Walz first become aware of widespread fraud in Minnesota social service programs?
For years, Minnesota taxpayers were told that one of the largest fraud scandals in state history was the result of deception that slipped through the cracks. That officials were caught off guard. That no one could have seen it coming. But recent sworn testimony before Congress challenges that narrative in a serious way. According to statements made under oath, warnings about massive fraud inside Minnesota's social service programs may have been known at the highest levels of state government long before the public ever heard a word. Tonight, we're going to walk carefully through what was said when the warnings allegedly surfaced and why the timeline now matters more than ever.
I would assume that he has been aware of it since he ran for office for governor in 2018.
By 2017, DHS investigators warned CCAP fraud could exceed 50%. What was that information elevated to the governor's office?
Yes, there was an OLA report.
Thank you, ma'am. By 2020, state officials knew feeding our future invoices were fraudulent. We know that payments continued to the AG's knowledge. Did they continue to the governor's knowledge as well?
Yes.
Attorney General Ellison agreed on tape to fight Minnesota's own Department of Human and Health Services in exchange for Somali political and financial support. In your personal opinion, do you believe it is a possibility that Governor Walz also made that personal deal, or that he at least knew about the Attorney General's agreement?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't want to rehash what you guys have spent hours answering. We know that there's a big issue with the fraud in Minnesota. So on a number of things, I'd first like to point out, thank you for being here today, but because of your testimony and because of some of the evidence that we've seen brought forward, as well as I'm sure the fact that this committee, I assume, at Chairman Comer's direction, will be soon subpoenaing AG Ellison, I would like to make criminal referrals regarding Governor Walz as well as AG Ellison. As you know, U.S. Code 371 and U.S. Code 2, which deals with criminalized conspiracies to defraud the United States and establishes liability for individuals who knowingly aid or abet the commission of federal offense, includes willful blindness or deliberate inaction where duties to act exist. So I will be referring to them later on today.
Welcome back to Stateline. Let's take this step by step because the details matter. This story centers on congressional testimony involving Minnesota's massive social services fraud scandal, including the Feeding Our Future case, which became one of the largest pandemic-era fraud schemes in the country. During questioning, a key issue was raised. When did Governor Tim Walz first become aware that widespread fraud was taking place? According to testimony, the answer may be as early as 2018, when Walz was running for governor. That's significant because it suggests awareness did not come after the scandal exploded publicly, but potentially before he even entered office. The witness explained that concerns inside Minnesota's Department of Human Services were already serious by 2017. Investigators reportedly warned that fraud in the Child Care Assistance Program, known as CCAP, could exceed 50%. That's not isolated abuse. That's a system being exploited at scale. Importantly, this wasn't just internal chatter. An Office of the Legislative Auditor report was produced, and testimony stated that this information was elevated to the governor's office. In other words, formal warnings existed, and those warnings allegedly reached the top. This raises the first major question. If state leadership was alerted to the possibility of massive fraud before Walz took office, what steps were taken once he became governor? Because the fraud didn't stop. In fact, it grew. By 2020, during the height of COVID relief spending, state officials allegedly knew that invoices submitted through Feeding Our Future were fraudulent. This wasn't speculation after the fact. According to testimony, officials knew the paperwork was fake while payments were still going out the door. Despite that knowledge, payments continued. The witness was asked directly whether those payments continued with the knowledge of the Attorney General. The answer given was yes. Then came the next question. Did they continue with the governor's knowledge as well? Again, the answer was yes. That's a critical point. Because at that moment, this stops being a story about bureaucratic failure and starts becoming a story about accountability at the executive level. The hearing also delved into allegations involving Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Testimony referenced a recorded statement in which Ellison allegedly agreed to oppose Minnesota's own Department of Human Services in exchange for political and financial support from members of the Somali community. That allegation alone is explosive. When asked whether Governor Walz made a similar deal or at least knew about Ellison's alleged agreement, the witness said they did not know. But the concern wasn't dismissed. The line of questioning made clear that lawmakers are now looking at whether political considerations played a role in delaying enforcement or blocking action. At this point, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Early warnings, formal reports, continued payments, and no decisive action that stopped the fraud before hundreds of millions of dollars were lost. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna made it clear she believes this goes beyond negligence. At the end of her questioning, she announced her intent to make criminal referrals against both Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison. She cited federal statutes related to conspiracy to defraud the United States and aiding and abetting federal offenses. Importantly, she also referenced the concept of willful blindness. That's when an official deliberately avoids acting despite having a legal duty to do so, essentially choosing not to see what's right in front of them. That distinction matters, because the legal question isn't just whether Walz or Ellison personally committed fraud. It's whether they knowingly allowed it to continue once they were aware of it. And if subpoenas follow, which the committee strongly suggested they will, this story is far from over. For Minnesotans, this hits close to home. These programs were meant to help vulnerable families. Instead, they became pipelines for massive theft, while legitimate needs went unmet. Taxpayers paid the price, and trust in public institutions took another hit. For the rest of the country, this case serves as a warning. When government grows rapidly, oversight often lags. And when political considerations outweigh enforcement, fraud flourishes. The central question remains unanswered. If leaders knew, why didn't they act? And if they didn't know, how did so many warnings fail to break through? As more testimony emerges and investigations continue, the timeline will matter. Who knew what and when may ultimately determine whether this scandal ends in embarrassment or accountability. That's why this hearing matters. And that's why the answers can't be brushed aside as political theater.